Now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to thee, O Lord. Amen. A few years ago, I made a trip out to New Mexico to see the balloon fiesta. There wasn't as much feedback. Oh, there we go. I'm going to wait till it dies down just a little bit. I think we're good. If you're not familiar, it's just a bunch of balloons in front of a mountain. Not really a big deal, but I was enchanted by the idea. Probably that's why they call it the land of enchantment. But the last day I was there, they canceled it because of high winds, which I didn't even realize was a possibility. So I made the impromptu decision to drive from Albuquerque north up to Taos because I'd never been there before. So after I was thoroughly caffeinated, I got on I-25 and headed up north, picked the highway outside Espanola, and was on my way. The sun was out, my windows were down, and I was enjoying a pleasant drive up into the mountains. I thought I knew where I was going because I'm pretty good with directions, but I was mostly just following where Apple Maps told me to go. Just as I was thinking about lunch and wondering what amazing view was around the next corner, the vibe shifted. Suddenly, I found myself without cell service, winding through a valley alongside the Rio Grande. I was pretty sure I stayed on the same road the whole way, but I wasn't sure. It was also at this point I realized that not only did I not know where I was, nobody else did either, since this was an impromptu decision. For an introvert, this is often a comfort, but since I was one tire pressure warning light away from a really bad day in the desert, it was not the thrill that it usually is. It felt like much longer, but I think it was probably about an hour. I emerged from the valley and was greeted with a majestic view of Wheeler Peak just as cell service returned. My playlist came back on and all was right with the world, at least until I took a different route home that also did not have cell service, and more anxiety about being alone in the desert emerged. Now, I don't know if you've driven this road before, but I think you know something about how things can take a turn at a moment's notice. How a pleasant afternoon driving in the sunlight can turn into getting lost in the shadows of the valley. My experience in New Mexico was just a more mundane version of what life can really be like sometimes. We think we're headed for the mountains, then we realize we're alone in the valley. I don't know what the valley is for you specifically, but when you're there, it's what sets your anxiety on edge, makes you realize you're not in control anymore. It's when you start to feel threatened, maybe not by real enemies, but by the thought of what might happen. It's where you can see the light, but it's just not shining on you. That's the valley. We're starting in the valley today because the claim Jesus makes in this passage we just heard. He calls himself the Good Shepherd. And if you've ever been lost in a valley without a map, that claim has the power to bring enormous comfort. But to feel the full weight of what he's actually claiming, we're going to have to go back to the Old Testament to see where some of this imagery comes from. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know a lot about modern shepherds. Actually, all I really know about is Australian shepherds, and I have all sorts of fun facts about them. So, for instance, did you know that 85% of Australian shepherds are dogs? The rest of them are ranchers in New South Wales. Who knew? Now, when it comes to shepherds in the ancient world, I know a little bit more just from some of my studies. In the ancient Near East, this picture of a shepherd, it wasn't primarily a pastoral image the way we might think of it today. And I even mean pastoral in the original sense of having to do with being in the pasture. Believe it or not, this image in the ancient world had royal connotations. Kings across the ancient world would use the shepherd language to describe their rule. As the shepherd oversaw the welfare, protection, and sustenance of his flock, so also the king would do the same. At least that's what his PR campaign suggested he did. Now, when the Old Testament picks up this image, it actually first applies it to God, and it does so in the Exodus. Think of the way God leads his people out of Egypt, through the wilderness, toward the promised land, leading, guiding, protecting them through hostile terrain in the presence of many enemies. Not accidental that it's pictured this way. Exodus is a picture of what kind of shepherd the Lord is. Now, if we fast forward a bit in the story of the Bible, we find them settled in the pasture of the promised land, but wanting to have a king like the other nations. God grants them their request, but it doesn't go well. If you've read the stories in Samuel and Kings, downhill pretty fast. But the high point is probably David. He's a figure who holds together the literal and the metaphorical images of a shepherd at once. Other kings in the ancient Near East merely used the shepherd imagery. David was molded by it. David, at least on paper, is set up to rule Israel the way a shepherd looks over his flock. Now, beyond David, when we think about shepherds in the Old Testament, we probably think of a famous 23rd chapter in the Bible. I know it's the one I think of when I think of these sorts of things. It's not one of our texts for this week, so I'm going to read it to you. It goes like this. Woe to the shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, declares the Lord. You weren't expecting that. Therefore, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, concerning the shepherds who care for my people. You have scattered my flock and have driven them away. You have not attended to them. Behold, I will attend to you for your evil deeds, declares the Lord. Then I will gather the remnant of my flock out of all the countries where I have driven them, and I will bring them back to their fold, and they shall be fruitful and multiply. I will set shepherds over them, who will care for them, and they shall fear no more, nor be dismayed, neither shall any be missing, declares the Lord. Now, rather than Psalm 23, that's Jeremiah chapter 23. It's what the Bible nerds would call a woe oracle. And it's essentially a formal announcement of judgment against the kings of Judah. At this point in Israel's history, the nation has been split into a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom, and the northern kingdom has been sent off into exile, and the southern kingdom is on the verge of it because of how poorly the shepherds, i.e. the kings, are doing their job. They did not attend to the people, so the people were scattered. Now, the language in this passage is significant. In this case, it's the same Hebrew word twice in the space of 2 verses. Once for what the shepherds failed to do, and once for what the Lord is going to do to them. The word can mean to care for someone or to call someone to account. And that wordplay is what's going on in Jeremiah. Thankfully, though, Jeremiah does not stop at this indictment. He moves on to a promise. You heard it probably towards the end, that the Lord will put new shepherds in place who will gather back the scattered flocks. The prophet Ezekiel takes this imagery a little bit further in Ezekiel chapter 34. He starts with a similar word of condemnation, but then rather than promising that the Lord would put new shepherds, maybe a descendant of David, in place, the Lord through Ezekiel says, "Behold, I myself will search for my sheep and seek them out. As a shepherd seeks out his flock when he is among his sheep, so I will seek out my sheep." So the promise as the Old Testament draws to a close is not just that a better shepherd is coming, it's that God himself is going to come to do the job. That promise is left hanging unresolved for centuries. So when Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd," it's not a casual claim, to say the least. Now, there's one other important background detail before we look at what Jesus says in John 10. In John's gospel, there's several times Jesus makes "I am" statements. Every time he does so, he's reaching back to a scene from the Old Testament where Moses approaches the burning bush and asks God what his name is, and God simply replies, "I am." So when Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd," he's not just giving a job description. He's actually making 2 claims about his identity that his audience would have found either profound or blasphemous. And if we keep reading in John 10, we see that it's a mix of both. The first claim he's making is messianic. He's saying he is this descendant of David who's going to be the human shepherd that was promised. But the second way his claim works is that he's saying he is God in the flesh who has come to be the shepherd that Ezekiel promised. That's why some in the crowd want to worship him and others want to stone him. You don't get a mild reaction when you claim to be God in the flesh. But there's something significant in the way Jesus qualifies his claim. He could have just said, I am the shepherd. And the audience would have understood exactly what he meant. But he says, I am the good shepherd. Now, in Greek, there are two words that get translated as good in English. One of them has the connotation of being morally virtuous, upright, righteous. The other one means something closer to beautiful, noble. We see it in our word calligraphy, which means beautiful writing, or kaleidoscope, which literally means beautiful form observed, but you know it as a children's toy that has mirrors in it and colored bits of glass. Jesus uses that word for beautiful, noble, complete, and true when he says he is the good shepherd. So he's not saying necessarily that he's morally superior, although it's probably included in his claim. It's more that he is the ultimate shepherd. He's the fulfillment of all the shepherds in the Old Testament, failed or otherwise, were pointing toward. He is saying that he is what a shepherd is in the most complete sense of what that word can mean. Now, the contrast he draws is actually, we notice, not between a good shepherd and a bad shepherd. It's between a good shepherd and a hired hand. Now, the hired hand, he's not really a villain. He's not the bad guy in the story necessarily. It's just more that he's not as invested in the welfare of the sheep as the way the shepherd is. When the wolf comes, he runs away, which is what you should probably do. You probably shouldn't try to pet it or befriend it or domesticate it, breed it, and then eventually its descendants will herd the sheep for you. You should run away if the wolf comes, if you're not that invested like the hired hand is. But that's not what the good shepherd does. He actually says he will lay down his life for the sheep. He will get in the way of the wolf, so to speak. Now, while it might be hard to believe that Jesus would do that for us, he knows us in a way that is maybe even more than we know ourselves. He says he knows his sheep and his sheep know him. And then he says that this knowing is the same kind of knowing that exists between him and the Father. They share a degree of perfect knowledge between two people about what they are really like, the way the Father knows the Son. Even the healthiest marriage you know has not achieved that kind of relational knowledge. And yet, the intimacy Jesus shares with his Father is the same category of relationship he claims for his flock. He doesn't know you the way an employer knows an employee. He knows you the way the Father knows the Son, which is what makes his claim to be willing to lay down his life all the more extraordinary. What Jesus is saying here in John 10 is the theological meaning behind the passion narratives we heard during Holy Week. In those, Jesus was betrayed, handed over, but ultimately gave up his own life for us. He wasn't overcome. He wasn't taken by surprise. As the good shepherd, he walked into the valley first, voluntarily, so his sheep would not have to walk through it alone. And so speaking of the valley, let's actually turn to that 23rd chapter that I alluded to earlier. We're going to do a little exercise here. I hope that's okay. I'm used to the classroom more than the pulpit, but in front of you, you have a Book of Common Prayer, a little red book there with the cross on it. I want us to turn to Psalm 23 in there. I believe it's on page 612, give or take a page or two. While you're turning there, I'm going to read something about this passage that an Old Testament scholar says. He says, Psalm 23 is all imagery in that you can't tie down any concrete situation the author has in mind. Because of that, he says readers can directly access the psalm through their own experiences. In other words, I want to suggest the psalm was written for your valley, whatever that might be. Now, before we look in detail at this psalm, I want to read, not that I haven't been reading already, but I want to read sort of a shadow version of Psalm 23. It's what the valley sounds like when you're walking through it alone. Before you look too much at the actual psalm, just listen to these words. I am on my own. No one looks out for me or protects me. I experience a continual sense of need. Nothing is quite right. I'm always restless, easily frustrated, and often disappointed. My soul feels broken, twisted, and stuck. I stumble down some dark paths. I'm haunted by emptiness and futility, the shadows of death. I fear the big hurt and the final loss. I find no lasting comfort. My cup is never quite full enough. Disappointment follows me all the days of my life. That is what the valley sounds and feels like without the shepherd in it. And for some of you, that might not be a hypothetical voice. But let's look at what's the true version, the Psalm 23, the beloved text that many of us maybe have memorized or we've heard numerous times, but I want us to see something in it. I didn't even, if you've never seen this before, I didn't even notice this after 8 years of Bible school, but it's right there on the page. I'm going to read it and then point something out. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, and you anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. God is present in these opening verses, but he's present as a distance. You look at verses 1 through 3. He's doing things for us, he's leading, he's provided, but it's he. He is still over there, while we are over here. Third person pronouns, he's being addressed at a distance. Then notice what happens when you realize you're in the valley. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Second person pronouns. He's now close. He's able to be addressed directly, not talked about from a distance. The first 3 verses, there's a distance. But in the darkest valley, he draws near at the moment we become aware of danger. Now, I say become aware because there's a way that you can read this psalm as actually starting, if not in the valley, on the edge of it. So much like New Mexico, still waters and green pastures in the ancient world are not out in the open plain, or in the modern Middle East for that matter. You find them where there's a mix of sunlight and shade, which is often in the valley. The valley, it turns out, is where the Lord meets us, but is also where he leads and sustains us. The Good Shepherd doesn't deliver over his sheep from the dark terrain, but he does walk ahead of it. That's what Jesus meant when he said the Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He didn't stay up on the canyon rim and call down encouragement. He entered the valley first, ahead of us, so that when we find ourselves there, without a map, without a signal, without any idea how long it goes, we are not alone. I've actually returned to that road in New Mexico a few times now. Now that I've driven it more than once, the valley doesn't disorient me the way it used to. I know roughly where cell phone signal is lost. I know about how long it takes to get it back. And I know what kind of burger with green chilies is waiting for me somewhere in Taos. When I drive that same road now, I don't still feel the anxiety of truly being alone, even though that's just a mundane example. But some of us are in a valley we didn't choose to drive into. We don't have the perspective yet that comes from having been through it before. Don't know how long it goes. We don't know if the signal's coming back. You can't even see the peak from where you're standing, much less know there's a rewarding view a few miles down the road. The psalm and our passage in John today doesn't promise us a mountaintop, not yet at least. What it promises you is this: the shepherd who knows you the way the Father knows the Son, the one who stayed when everyone else ran, who laid down his life, took it up again He is with you. Not watching from a distance, not waiting for you up at the trailhead, but here in the valley with you. That's what it means that he is the Good Shepherd. Amen.